Greetings sailors, and welcome to my first replay of 10.0, and to be honest, the only 10.0 game I've had so far that I've actually enjoyed in any way, shape or form, because I've been really quite struggling with the commander skill rework. Now, this is going to be more background footage to me just rambling about it generally, but I think it is still a fairly decent Öland game, so hopefully it's entertaining on that basis alone. But as for the rework itself, well, I have mixed feelings. Very, very mixed feelings. I'm going to preface all this by saying I do appreciate the intent of the rework generally, because previously we had a one-size-fits-all captain skill tree, and you could end up putting captain skills on, completely inappropriate captain skills on different classes of ships. And they tried to address that by greying out certain skills when you were in certain classes, but what they've done is expanded upon that and actually just kind of made it so that now each class has its own theoretically appropriate skill tree. And like I said, I think that's actually a decent idea. However, the implementation has been a bit rocky. I mean, first off, we have just some of the individual skills being, best disjointed. Well, I'll say at best disjointed. Some of them are fine. Some of them are absolutely fine. Some of them are downgrades on what we had before for the individual classes, which in some cases is disappointing. But some of them feel really disjointed. And then, in the worst case, you have Deadeye. And there's one or two other skills that are quite questionable as well, like carriers being able to negate some of your torp belt protection, for example, which in the cases of some ships means they'll be able to do effectively a fair bit more damage, because some ships, especially some battleships, don't exactly have a good amount of torp belt protection. So that one is kind of a bit ouchy if you're facing off against carriers. But I don't think anything really is in the same league as Deadeye. Deadeye is making a lot of people scratch their heads and just question why this skill got through testing intact without any debuffs to go with such a powerful buff. I mean, one interesting thing to compare it to is the concealment skill for carriers, which now has a significant, some might say too significant, penalty to your squad return speed of, I was it like 50%? And if you're in one of those carriers which has a fairly large detection radius, then you're left with a very, very difficult choice indeed. But Deadeye particularly, I mean, it's not like Wargaming didn't have the feedback during the PTS, during the testing, that this one was going to be a problem, and somehow they went forward with it as is anyway, and so you basically now have a skill that is actively promoting camping at the back and sniping with your battleships at very long range, which doesn't exactly promote dynamic gameplay, and it's already had a fairly major effect on the meta. So that one I am baffled by, and I think a lot of people are baffled by, because it's just a straight up negative change to the game, and I really can't understand why Leicester thought this would be a good idea to add, like what the end goal here was, because it's explicitly designed for snipey long-range battleships, and it's a really powerful skill, especially on some battleships like Legendary Module Yamato or Slava, or I think Champagne is another one. Flamu's been doing ridiculous things with the Champagne recently. So how this wasn't the explicit end goal, I don't know, and why Wargaming would think that having more long-range snipey camping battleships would be a good thing is a question I really cannot answer, but here we are. Now, on top of that, we have just other more personal reasons, like I have probably 300 plus captains that need to be respec'd. I know I've only done a handful so far. I don't know when I'm going to get around to actually streaming warships again, because it's just going to take me so long to, like, it's just summoning the energy to go through all the captains and redo them and figure out, you know, what's going to work for each ship. And to be honest, even on some ships, they're just downgraded compared to what they were before. I mean, German secondaries are the kind of headline example there, but there's other things like supercruisers don't have access to some of the level of survivability skills that might have been useful before, that are now kind of more reserved for battleships. And as I've touched on, you know, some skills became more expensive, some have been separated into separate skills. On carriers, for example, there's no single superintendent skill anymore. You've got a separate one to add extra fighter consumables and one to add extra heal consumables to your torpedo bombers for those tiers of torpedo bomber that have that. So some point choices are a lot more expensive now, and to some level I actually think that's not like a bad thing, but also at the same time it irks me. I appreciate they're trying to make the player make some more difficult choices, but I don't think, again, it's like the devil's in the details. I don't necessarily think all of these make sense. Priority target, for example, is now a bit more expensive on, especially for cruisers. You know, that one extra point that you could spend elsewhere is kind of annoying, especially as now the battleships are all sitting further back sniping, and that's especially harsh for the cruisers. So knowing when and where and how many ships are pointing their guns at you is actually even more important than it ever was before. And what I got to thinking about the other day was the last time that there was a skill they considered so important that, you know, everybody was taking it was I've forgotten the name of it now, but you know, the one that tells you when you're spotted or not, and they just decided they were going to give that one to every captain as, you know, a kind of default skill. And this time round the reaction instead has been to make it more expensive, where it's a popular skill that, you know, an important skill that everyone's taking. And they could have taken the opportunity to, for instance, make different versions of the skill. You could have had a basic version of the skill that tells you, yes, you're being targeted by, say, somebody, not necessarily how many people are targeting you, but you're being targeted by somebody. And then you have a more expensive version of the skill that tells you how many people are targeting you, or maybe the maximum caliber of guns that are targeting you, or, you know, stuff like that. So it's like looking at the amended skills as well, I also just see so many what could have been interesting synergies, like missed opportunities for things they could have done, and instead, like I said, everything just feels a bit awkward and disjointed overall. So yeah, I'm kind of struggling to find my enthusiasm with warships at the moment, and I think high tiers generally are just out. Like tier 8 is now a struggle to want to play. Tier 9 and tier 10 I just don't want to play at all. And so that still leaves me with the mid tiers okay, but you know, even if I take tier 6s, there's a very real chance of being sniped by tier 8 battleships sitting at the back with Deadeye and getting quite painful dispersion that just obliterates me in one go. So yeah, I don't know, like there was stuff already that was curbing my enthusiasm about warships, and now it's even more curbed than it was before. So Yeah, I don't know. I mean, once I get the captain skills figured out a bit more in my head in terms of which ones to use and get more captains actually spec'd, then we'll see. And maybe once the meta settles down a bit, and Wargaming also addressing the Deadeye situation would be nice. They've said they are going to come back to us with something at some point, but there doesn't seem to be any like particular urgency to it. So yeah, I mean, it's tempting almost to think of it like when radiolocation or RPF or whatever it was called at the time was introduced, and there was a lot of doomsaying about that as well. But because it was that top level skill at the time, it was an expensive buy. I mean, it kind of worked out in that sometimes it could actually make a difference, but it wasn't like the game-ending thing that people thought it might be, and I kind of erred on the side of caution that time. And I'm trying to have that same mindset this time, but this isn't just one skill, this is just all of the skills being overhauled, and it's been done in such a way that just, I don't know, I don't want to say it leaves me uncertain about the future of World of Warships, but maybe it's more accurate to say it leaves me uncertain about my future with World of Warships. We'll put it that way. So anyway, that was, as you saw, a fairly decent game. It got a bit hairy at the end there, with the Shima obviously able to consistently outspot me, but we were able to take that game in the end. I actually had some decent torp hits into battleships as well, and ended up with a very nice amount of base XP. If there had been a carrier in play, of course that probably would have been a very different experience, but as it was, fortunately there wasn't, and there wasn't that much radar to worry about either. There was really only that time I got radared at the start, and I was really prepared for that eventuality. So yeah, so for the time being, when I do play, I think it's probably largely going to be destroyers. Destroyers seem to have been the least badly affected. I don't know if that's the right word or the right phrase to use. They seem to have been sort of overall less impacted in their meta compared to before. And if anything, the ability of destroyers to spot enemy battleships, and even carriers to spot enemy battleships, to negate that Deadeye skill is quite important now. I mean, it was already important to spot for your team as a destroyer anyway, but now it's even more important because it's actually stopping enemy battleships from getting a fairly significant advantage, which has no disadvantages other than its captain skill points they could have spent on, you know, survivability instead. But if you're sitting all the way at the back and always trying to hit at ranges outside your spotting, your I think it's the base spotting range it runs off, pretty sure it is, then yeah, you know, that's less of a concern when you're in a battleship at that point anyway. So, you know, RIP brawling battleships, I guess. There's just no point in playing them at the moment. Anyways, that's it for this replay. I hope to be more upbeat next time, but who knows? Hopefully you enjoyed the gameplay anyway, and if you did, you can like the video down below, leave a comment, all that jazz, hit the bell, etc., blah blah blah, and as always, stay tuned for more.